The Cleveland Browns versus the New York Jets. I cannot wait. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So, the Cleveland Browns versus the New York Jets. This is certainly an NFL game, that is for sure. I did have to double check. This is an NFL game. This isn't a college or amateur game. This is actually an NFL game, guys. So let's remember that. If the Browns versus the Dolphins was the battle of the mid, the battle of the bad, then this is the battle of the depressing, the battle of the pathetic, damn right, awful. Two franchises that I think you can pretty comfortably say have been the two worst franchises in the last 25 years in the NFL, with the Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets. The only reason the New York Jets have the worst kind of playoff stuff than us is all because of that playoff win in 2020 and obviously making the playoffs in 2023. If it wasn't for that, we would look just as crap as the Jets. They haven't made the playoffs, I believe, since 2010, was it? When they went to an AFC Championship game with a certain former ESPN commentator, shall we say, who got in a little bit of trouble the last couple of weeks. I'm not going to go too much into that. The Jets have been pretty terrible, the last decade. So have the Browns. Two terrible teams, not just previous years, this year as well. Both teams coming into this game with pretty bad records. The Browns are 2-6. The Jets are 1-7. I don't want to talk too much about this game because let's be completely honest, guys. Do you really want to sit here for 30 minutes and listen to me talk about the Cleveland Browns versus the New York Jets? Nope, I didn't think so. So I'll keep this somewhat quickly as I can. But I do want to talk about, obviously, the game itself. Talk about the matchups, offense, defense up against theirs. And then kind of finish off by giving my thoughts on where these teams are. Because I think, the Browns and the Jets are, eerily similar, but two teams that are at a crossroads right now, but kind of going in different directions, shall we say, and kind of want to talk a little bit about that at the end. But starting with this game, as I've said, this is a matchup between two terrible teams. There's no way of sugarcoating it. These are two bad teams. The Browns are 2-6. The Jets are 1-7. Only just got their win 2 weeks ago against the Bengals. We all know how the Bengals are this season. That's not exactly the hardest thing to do, to score points against them, unless your name is the Cleveland Browns. And obviously the Browns coming off of a pretty disappointing loss to the New England Patriots, where they had their arse handed to them, and the Patriots ran away with that quite comfortably. But both teams coming out of their bye, which is somewhat rare in my experience, obviously, usually because the Browns get shafted with their bye weeks and anything given by the NFL. But two teams coming off a bye to play each other, so both teams have had 2 weeks to prepare this game. Is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing? I suppose we'll have to wait and see. When you got a bad team with a good 2 weeks to plan a game, maybe they get too overthinking and then we just have two terrible game plans this game, but we'll have to wait and see. But as I said, both teams should be somewhat relatively rested, somewhat bit fresher, with both of them coming off of the bye week. But, as I said, both teams are bad. The Jets, I don't really know. I'll have to ask the Jets fan. But, Browns fans, yes, I've spoken about this before, we're all disappointed. It feels dirty with how we've got to the 2-6 record, but it's not that far off, I don't think, what many people thought before the season. When we all looked at these first 6 to 8 games, I think best case scenario, people were coming up with 3-5. So to be 2-6 is not that far off where a lot of people kind of had the Browns. Most of the media had the Browns as the worst team in the NFL this year, so they're not that far off. But as I said, it's more so just how it's felt getting here. It's just felt dirty. It's felt gross. We've seen so many bad performances, so many pathetic performances from the offense, from the special teams, disappointing here and there from the defense. It's just been awful. So even though we're about where a lot of people thought we would be, it just didn't feel great getting here. Whereas the Jets, now don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone was predicting them to go and make the playoffs and win 11 games. But the Jets did have a bit of optimism going into this season. They brought in a new head coach. They got rid of the whole Aaron Rodgers malarkey and everything that went down with that. Basically, kicked everything to do with that out of the building. They brought in Aaron Glenn, who was a highly sought after head coach candidate. They signed Justin Fields that, anyone that's watched Justin Fields probably didn't, but you can convince yourself after the performances he had last year with the Steelers that, finally we can get a good offense around him. This could look pretty decent. So I think a lot of Jets fans went into this year cautiously optimistic. As I said, I don't think any of them thought, playoff contention and stuff like that, but I think they thought they were going to see some fun football with obviously Aaron Glenn as a head coach kind of leading that new philosophy. And it's been the complete opposite. Aaron Glenn has been bad, like really bad. Like, I'm surprised he even had a job in some of the end of them games bad, with some of his decision-making, clock management, etc., etc. It has not been a good start to a head coaching career for Aaron Glenn. I think a lot of people will be surprised if he's not one and done. Justin Fields has been pretty bad as well. The stats don't show too much because you look at just the raw stats and don't watch the games. You could argue to yourself that actually he's playing quite well, but if you actually watch the games, he's not playing very well at all. Basically, all of the concerns that people had with Justin Fields during the first few years of his career, they're all still there. He doesn't seem to be able to shake any of them. So, been a very disappointing start for him. And this Jets team overall, I mean, they've been bad, like really bad. They only just got their first win against the Bengals as the product of playing a bad Bengals team. So, again, as I said, two really bad teams. The Browns, you could argue maybe the better of the bad teams. Maybe, I suppose you could make that argument. But obviously this game itself, as I said, with the Browns being, the Browns are favoured in this game. I don't think they were initially favoured until the Jets had a fire sale, which we will get into in a bit. But now the Browns are favoured in this game, despite it being in New York, which every time I play at that stadium, I just hold my breath. And I'm just so terrified because of the amount of injuries we've seen at that stadium. So cross your fingers, touch wood that none of the players this Sunday get hurt on that absolute abomination of a field. But as I said, Browns are favourites. They are in position to win this game. And if I'm being completely honest, they should win this game. They have to win this game if they want to keep pretending that they're a serious football team. If they lose this game, obviously, depending somewhat how, it's going to be quite hard to shake off any "we're not tanking" arguments because, as I said, this Jets team was bad when they were trying, like really bad. Now they're not trying. It would just be inexcusable to lose to this team. I made a joke on Twitter. If the Browns do lose this game, let's wrap this thing up. If the Browns lose this game, let's start the rookies all the way out. I say that like we haven't been starting rookies all season anyway, but let's just wrap this thing up. Let's lose every game for the rest of the season and go get that number one overall pick, because you can't lose to the Jets and then pretend you're a serious organisation and go pick up an extra 1 or 2 wins, take yourself to the 6th overall pick. You've just had a terrible season. You're a bad football team, but you've somehow took yourself out of a draft pick. So lose this game and fuck it. Let's wrap it in, boys. Let's get this thing wrapped up and get through the final 8 weeks of losing as best as we can. But they should not lose this game. That there is just, even with it being in New York, even with all of that kind of stuff, New York still has good players. They still have Garrett Wilson, although he is questionable for this game. They still have Breece Hall, although he's probably questionable for forever, considering that he wanted to leave and they didn't let him go. He walks at the end of the year, so how motivated is he going to be for the rest of the year? I do not know. But as I said, there is just no excuse for this one. The Browns have to win this game if they are anywhat of a serious football team. And if they don't, as I said, let's wrap this up. Let's go lose the rest of the way out. And at that point, you probably might as well just fire everyone and completely overhaul this, because you can't lose to this Jets team, man. Like, they are that bad. They are really that bad. But going into the actual matchups, obviously, two somewhat similar, not entirely similar, but two teams with pretty bad offenses that are obviously better on defense. But I say that the Jets haven't been that much better on defense, whereas the Browns' defense, of course, has been that much better than the offense. the Browns' offense going up against the Jets' defense. So this is kind of a tough one, I suppose, because they have just traded their two best defensive players. Sauce Gardner is obviously now an Indianapolis Colt, and Quinnen Williams is now a Dallas Cowboy. So, this defense, as I said, it was okay, arguably, better somewhat than the offense. But how much so is that going to continue to be the case now that it is a defense without Quinnen Williams and without Sauce Gardner? Don't get me wrong, I've never been the biggest Sauce Gardner. Let me preference by saying that I think Sauce Gardner is a very good corner, but I've never bought into the kind of elite top of the league corners. I just don't think you could be one of those top guys if you're only able to play one side of defense to an elite level. This is a guy that in zone is fantastic, one of the better zone corners in the NFL. Fits Indianapolis really well because they like to play a lot of zone. They play more zone than most. But 2 first-round picks and the elite tag for a guy that is as inadequate in man as he is, I kind of push back on that. But it's still one of their best corner on the team. He is no longer there. Quinnen Williams, one of their best defensive linemen on the team, he is no longer there. He's one of those rare blend of interior players that is so good against the run and also a really plus-level pass rusher. So I'm obviously, from a Browns perspective, happy about not having to play him. But even still, this defense was better against the pass than they were against the run. Maybe that is because of those corners, etc. But I think they are 9th in passing attempts, 11 in passing yards. So they are the top half of the league in passing yards given up. But how much of that is just how bad they are and teams just get up early and then run the ball? You can make that argument, and obviously that is kind of shown with their defensive performances against the run. They are 30th in yards against the run. 26th in yards against the run, 30th in attempts. So it just shows you that a lot of teams are running the ball against the Jets because as soon as you get up, you're not exactly worried too much about this Jets offense scoring. This is a Jets offense that has, started the year scoring 32 points and since then has scored 10 points, 27 points, 21 points, 22 points, 11 points, 6 points, and then obviously had the 39 points against the Bengals in that crazy game towards the end. So it's a very hit and miss scoring team. Some games they go out and score 30, but usually in those games they give up 35. Whereas in some games they go out and score 10 and only give up 15. So the Jets defense is what it is. They can cause you some problems. They have caused some teams problems this year. As I just mentioned, there's been games where they held Denver to 13 points. The more we see Denver, how impressive is that? I don't know. They only just scored 10 points against the fucking Raiders, so maybe that's not that impressive. 13 points against the Carolina Panthers. They've been playing pretty well recently, so you could argue that's pretty good. But then, they do have a lot of games where whenever they play a high-powered offense, they do seem to give up a lot of points. The Browns are not a high-powered offense, though. So, this game could be closer than we like, purely just because of how bad the Browns' offense is going up against this Jets defense. But I still expect the Browns to, even with how bad that they have been on offense, if you can't move the ball against this Jets team, then you have no business playing in the NFL, if I'm being completely honest. Dylan Gabriel, if he looks terrible in this game, let's wrap that up and bring in Shedeur. I've been someone that has defended Dylan. I think that you deserve at least 4 or 5 games as a rookie, especially considering obviously the circumstances around the games that he started his career with. So I'm not as bothered, shall we say, with him starting this game coming out of the bye week. But if he struggles against this Jets team without Sauce Gardner, without Quinnen Williams, who are actively tanking, actively trying to lose, then obviously you're going to be concerned. And at that point, we should make the change to Shedeur Sanders. As I mentioned, they've given up a lot of rushing yards, given up a lot of rushing attempts. That is as it is I suppose, in every game for the Browns. That is the road to success. They need to establish the run game. Going into that Patriots game, we spoke about it then. The Browns had to get the run game going just because of how good that their defense was against it. Just to at least make them, somewhat of the threat of the run and give Dillon a little bit of more space, a little bit of more time back there. They were unable to do that. If they're unable to do that against, and that was against one of the best rushing defenses in the NFL, arguably the best rushing defense in the NFL. They've played Quinshon Judkins and Bijan Robinson the last 2 weeks, and they still haven't given up a 50-yard passer all season to 50-yard rusher all season to any NFL rushing back. Fuck me, a 50-yard passer, that would be even more insane than the Browns' 300-yard passer record, but which I think is at about 35 games now, which is quite impressive. But that's the road to success. The Browns, you couldn't get your run game going against the Patriots, which was one of the better run defenses in the NFL. But that excuse does not apply this week. If you can't get your run game going against this Jets team, there is a problem with your run game. That's where it starts. The Browns have to establish the run. It obviously starts up front with the offensive line. I have been somewhat, happier with the run blocking the last few weeks. I do think, especially in the interior, we have seen a slight uptick, and I say slight because it's still not great. A slight uptick in the run blocking on this offensive line. If they can carry that this week, we have to get Quinshon Judkins going this week. We were unable to get him going last week. Attack the run early. I don't really care about the whole, oh my God, we ran it twice consecutively. I don't care about that stuff. They have to establish the run game in this game and give Dillon every chance that he can. But then even with that being said, yes, this was 11th in pass defense, the Jets going into this game. So not top of the lead, but not, bottom by any means. But now after losing Sauce Gardner and after losing obviously Quinnen Williams as well, Francis Muada is out. He's questionable for this game. So if he doesn't play, even more excuse. There's no excuse for Dillon in this game to not play, at least better than what we've seen the last couple of weeks. But again, it starts with the run game. Got to get the run game going against the Jets, and obviously the pass game comes off of that. What are we going to see with obviously Tommy Rees being the new coordinator? Well, I say coordinator, the new play caller. He obviously was the offensive coordinator. He will be calling plays. So will we see somewhat of a difference? I don't think we'll see that much of a difference. This is a guy that ran the ball a lot at Alabama. He ran the ball twice as much as he threw the ball with that Alabama team in 2023, which went 12-1 and had a playoff appearance and had a really good season. Don't get me wrong. And you look at kind of the weapons on that Alabama team, shall we say, I would make an argument that probably one of the worst kind of, pool of weapons and pool of talent that Alabama have had on offense the last couple of decades, if we're being completely honest. This was a team whose leading receiver was, what's his name, the guy that the Bengals drafted, the bit of a head nut guy over there, Jermaine Burton. He was the leading receiver for Alabama that year, and this is a team that has seen Devontae Smith and players like that come out not that long ago. So he did pretty well at Alabama with, as I said, not limited resources. Obviously, it's Alabama. You still have great talent there, but arguably the least amount of talent in terms of like skill positions, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, etc., that they've had in quite some time. And he obviously was able to be successful with them. And he did so by running the fucking football. That is what that Alabama team did. They ran the football. Now, how much of that was influenced by having Jalen Milroe at quarterback? Probably some. Having a running quarterback is obviously going to influence your style of offense. I think he was second in the team in rushing attempts that year, second in the team in rushing yards. So that's, I suppose, what we're not going to see is obviously Dillon Gabriel running the ball 15 times for 86 yards. I don't think we're going to see that, but I do think we're going to see a continued emphasis on this run game and then kind of establishing the passing game off of the run game. From everything I've seen from Tommy Rees and his time at Alabama, that's kind of my best case my best guess on it and how I think he's going to run this offense. I think we're still going to have a heavy focus on the run game, still have a heavy focus on those tight ends, although Harold Fanning is questionable for this game, which is slightly disappointing, obviously, if he is unable to go. But I'm interested to see what Tommy Rees can do in his first game calling plays. This is a guy who has had, I spoke about it in the off-season when he was promoted to offensive coordinator. He's had a lot of high talk about him from some pretty impressive people. Nick Saban said that he expects this guy to be one of the best offensive minds in college football, not too long. Obviously, that didn't happen because he ended up leaving college football to come and join the Cleveland Browns. But he's had a lot of good stuff to say about him. Everyone in the building clearly believes in him. We can talk all day and argue all day about what led to the decision of Kevin giving up play calling. As I said, we can argue about that all day, but one thing I don't think we can argue about is that they clearly made that move because they are confident enough in Tommy Rees. So I'm interested to see how he gets on today, and obviously if there's any major differences to this offense and how they run, but I don't think that will be the case. I think we still are going to see an emphasis on the run game and obviously extending the passing game through those tight ends and play action, etc., etc. But that's the offense. Again, the Browns' offense has been so fucking bad this year, so bad. If they continue to look inept this week, it's just a further kind of nail in the coffin, shall we say, for Kevin and for this offense. Because as I've said, I think Kevin's a good head coach and all of that stuff. But in the end of the day, when you're an offensive-minded head coach and your offense has been this bad and continues to be this bad, at what point do you draw the line? I'm sure we're going to be having those conversations if that is the case. But moving on to the defense. Now, this is the slightly more easier one to talk about, shall we say, because if we're being completely honest, the Browns should have no problem with this Jets offense. This is the 25th ranked offense in the NFL. This is the worst passing offense in the NFL. They are third in rushing yards, but how much of that is because of Justin Fields? I think quite some. But this is a bad offense, a really bad offense. They don't pass the ball really at all. I mean, we've seen games this year with Justin Fields having like 11 passing attempts. And last year, I maybe would have been more worried about that because of, last year, if anyone was following this channel, then you'd have seen me every single week moaning about this Browns run defense, kind of partly why I was absolutely on board with taking Mason Graham this year, and obviously the moves that they made, because I know people didn't want to talk about it because it's not the sexy thing to talk about, interior run defense. But the Browns' interior run defense was bad last year. It was their biggest kind of, it's what hurt them the most on defense. They've plugged that this year really, really well, and they now have obviously one of the better rushing defenses in the NFL. It took a little bit of hit the last 2 weeks. They've now gone down to 9th in yards when they were top 3, but they are still top 3 in touchdowns given up, and they are 2nd in yards an attempt. And obviously that is what the Jets like to do more than anything. Will we see a slight, change in philosophy for the Jets this week? Because we don't actually know, if Tyrod Taylor is going to be starting at quarterback. I think they wanted to make the move last week. It was quite clear that they were probably done with Justin Fields. 8 games into his 2-year, $40 million contract. Not great. And obviously it looked like they were ready to go with Tyrod Taylor, but he had a knee injury that kept him out of that game. And Justin Fields was able to go in there and actually have, arguably his best game of the year, which isn't that hard because he's not had many great games this year. And by the way, before anyone gets on me, I'm a Buckeye fan saying this. I loved Justin Fields, and he has really disappointed me in the NFL, but that's a story for another day. Where was I at? Yeah, so obviously we don't know who the actual starting quarterback is going to be for the Jets. I know Aaron Glenn seems to think this is some kind of like competitive advantage, not letting the other people know. Maybe if it was like, anyone not Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor, because these are two guys that at this point in their career are pretty different. Tyrod can use his legs, but if Tyrod's in there, you will probably see a more emphasis on the passing game. Whereas if Justin Fields is in there, just naturally by his lack of passing ability, you're obviously going to see more runs-oriented attack from them. So I don't think it matters too much which one it is. If it's Tyrod Taylor, maybe you've got to be a little bit more more attention on Garrett Wilson, although Garrett Wilson is questionable for this game. He was a full participant in practice, but has been dealing with a knee injury, obviously missed last week. If he doesn't play in this game, then even more so. I mean, there's just no excuse for the Browns to not be able to stop this Jets offense. But as I said, if it's Tyrod Taylor, I expect a little bit more emphasis on the passing game. You need to be a little bit more clued up on the back end. Whereas if it's Justin Fields, then you just basically load those boxes and you get after him and you get after the running backs. But as I said, if the Browns defense struggles in this game, then they aren't going to do themselves any favours when trying to fight back the kind of overrated tag that maybe they've been getting, which I don't buy too much into. I just think that when you are playing with such a bad rest of the roster as a defense, you are gonna give up plays. That is just something that you will do. One thing that does concern me is the Browns kind of, they are prone to giving up chunk plays on defense. It is something that has probably been their biggest fault this year. And, if you've got a Tyrod Taylor in there, do they get one of those chunk plays to Garrett Wilson? If you've got a Justin Fields in there, do they get one of those chunk plays on the back of his legs? Or one of the 6 passes he completes in the game? Is it a 50-yard bomb over the top? That's obviously something they have to be wary about. But as I said, the Browns defense should not have many problems going up against this Jets offense. And if they do, then that's obviously going to be a worrying sign, because this is just not a great offense. They're 22nd in first downs as well. 4.9 yards per play on offense. They are really not great. Funnily enough, they've actually had exactly the same amount of offensive plays as they've given up in defensive plays in 489, but obviously have less yards than what they've given up as well. So the Browns have got to do a good job on this Jets defense. If you can slow down this Jets offense, if you can, keep this Jets offense as, bad as they have been, as unfunctioning as they have been, as unproductive as they have been, then you could win this game fucking 6-0. They are that kind of team. They are that bad. So defense needs to have a big day. Miles obviously loves going up against Justin Fields, so I'm sure he'll be hoping it is Justin Fields. This is a game where you could easily see, whoever is starting for the Jets getting sacked 6-7 times. Although those tackles were a lot better last week. When you've got 2 young tackles, you obviously do expect some growing pains. But in the end of the day, as bad as the Jets are, I would do a lot of things to take their 2 tackles. Pretty much having bookend potential 10-year starters at left tackle and right tackle in both of those guys that they've got there, is such a bonus. And of all the bad stuff going on with the Jets, if you are a Jets fan, it is one thing to hang your head on, because obviously having those guys there is just massive for them. They were better last week, but again, they are still 2 young guys, so I would not be that shocked if Myles Garrett has a big game, obviously coming off of his 5-sack performance against the Patriots that we just completely ruined and got blown out regardless, despite of that. But as I said, Browns defense should have a good day against this Jets offense, and if they don't, then there is obviously going to be some questionable things and some worries that we need to address going forward. But the game overall, as I said, as I've kind of mentioned throughout, the Browns have no business losing this game. The Browns, this is one of the 3-4 worst teams in the NFL. It's the Jets, it's the Saints, it's the Titans. The Browns play the Titans this year. They play the Raiders this year. Don't play the Saints, but obviously playing the Jets this week. So this is their first game against one of the truly bottom of the barrel teams in the NFL this year, obviously after playing against some pretty good teams to start the year. So if we don't see improved performances, as I said at the start, let's wrap this shit up, go lose the rest of the way out and go get that number 1 overall pick, because we should not be losing to a team like the Jets. If you do win this game, you go to 3-6. Yes, some people are going to be annoyed with the whole, tanking stuff, draft position, all of that stuff. But in the end of the day, I don't see the Browns getting a top 3 pick regardless, with just how bad some of these teams are. As I mentioned, whether it's the Jets, whether it's the Titans, whether it's the Saints, whether it's the Raiders, it's going to be pretty hard, even if the Browns are actively trying to lose, to get a top 3 pick this year. I have no problem with, winning this game, winning the next game, winning a couple of games, getting back into this season. Maybe you're at 6-8, something like that, and you have that little bit at the end of the season to go and maybe get competitive about, maybe have a kind of thing to aim towards. I've always said that I think losing breeds losing. I think winning breeds winning. If you are tanking all year, doesn't matter what pick you get from the end of that, the culture that builds in the building can sometimes be so hard to overcome. And how many times have we seen teams that tank and then are unable to shake off that losing culture, even with the reward of getting the player at the end of it? So I'm not entirely, against trying to win these games, shall we say. But I'm not going to sit here and lie that say if the Browns lost this game, I'm not, of course, not going to be thinking about a top 3 pick. But as I said, we shouldn't be thinking about that in this game, and I that's just the way that I feel, especially not a game against the fucking New York Jets. So my prediction for this game is a Browns win. Shock. I've actually been nearly nailed on. I had the Browns 3-5 in my preseason predictions at this point in the season. They are 2-6. I actually picked the Packers win that I got right. I got the Dolphins win right. And I would have got the Bengals win right if Andre Schmidt made his kick. So one missed kick away from correcting all, perfectly predicting all the first 8 of the Browns games. So, some could argue I might be good at this stuff. Others would probably argue that I'm not, and myself included. But my prediction for this game, I think the Browns do run away with this one. If, as I said, they have to, because to give any kind of optimism going forward for the offense, for the defense, they need to run away with this game. They need to put away a bad team. We've not seen them go up against a team this bad this year. So, do they stoop down to the Jets level, or do they raise their game? That's kind of what I'm banking on. I think the Browns defense will be too good for this Jets team. Get a couple of scores. Don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting 35 plus points, but I could easily see the Browns winning this game, 14-7, 17-10, something like that. It of course would be nice to go see this offense go have an explosion and those guys go have big games, but I wouldn't exactly hold your breath. But that's my thoughts on the game overall. As I said, the Browns should be winning this one. They really should. If they don't, let's wrap this thing up and lose the rest of the way and go get that first overall pick, because that's what you deserve if you lose to this Jets team. But quickly before I finish, I did say that I wanted to keep this quick and under 30 minutes. It's gone over 30 minutes. Classic me talking, going over the amount that I wanted to go. But never mind. As I said, I wanted to finish by talking kind of about where these teams are, because obviously this week we've seen that the Jets went full fire sale mode at the end of the season, at the end of the deadline. I mentioned it earlier. They traded away Sauce Gardner. They traded away Quinnen Williams. Surprisingly, didn't trade away Breece Hall. Obviously thought that he would have gone as well, but they've kind of gone full fire sale mode. They know where they are. They know that they're a bad team. They know their season is gone. So why not load up on as many picks as you can and obviously take that route going forward? That is what they have done. As I said, they got 2 first-round picks for Sauce Gardner, which I am so jealous of. Yeah, I don't even think they were shopping him. I don't think the Colts were even, rumoured to be interested in. But as soon as that Jets GM heard 2 first-round picks for Sauce Gardner, I think he was just as shocked as the rest of us, and that's a move you have to accept, regardless of how much you like the player. So getting 2 first-round picks from him off the Colts, and of course getting a first-round pick off Dallas for Quinnen Williams, which is a conditional first-round pick, and it will be basically whatever pick ends up the higher out of Dallas's or Green Bay's next year is the pick that they will get. So the reason I say, obviously at a crossroads but go in 2 different ways, is that you've got 2 teams that are really bad, 2 teams that have gone in on certain positions, certain players. It's not worked out for them. They're not great. The Browns are in the same situation. How do the Jets respond, as I mentioned, the fire sale, let's load up on as many picks as we can. They've got 5 first-round picks in the next 2 years, with 2 pretty decent drafts coming up as well. They've got all the ammo they need to kickstart a rebuild. They've obviously decided that, the whole having a really good defense but not having a quarterback or anyone that can play offense doesn't work. That's why they were happy to trade away those defensive players. I think it's quite clear that they're going to use these, all of this draft capital to get themselves a quarterback, get themselves some offensive weapons, and do what 99% of the rest of the NFL is, and take that route. Whereas the Browns, obviously in a similar situation, held steady at the deadline. They only traded away Joe Tyron Shaniqua. Even after rumours of them buying, they only bought a 6th-round pick for Joe Tyron Shaniqua. So they've obviously decided to take the opposite approach. And, they probably want to, guys like David Njoku's on the last year of his contract, they probably want to get an extension done with him. Maybe someone like a Wyatt Teller. So, you've got 2 teams at a crossroads, both teams with a lot of questions to be answered. A lot of teams with a lot of questions that obviously about the coaching staff, about the front office, all of that stuff going forward. And how do they both respond? The Jets do the traditional way, which is, all right, let's load up on some picks for the next rebuild. Whereas the Browns trying to, kick the tires a little bit and trying to hold on. We could argue all day about what is the right approach. 5 first-round picks over the next 2 years, that would be lovely. But I don't think there's a player on the Browns that you can trade away for 2 first-round picks that's not named Myles Garrett, and I don't care how many picks it is. If you saw my previous video, I ain't fucking doing it. So I do think, you can argue that the Jets have, embarrassed the Browns in this scenario without tanking them, because if this are 2 teams that actually are tanking, you've got the Jets who have got a Russian T-34, and the Browns are, they're stuck on the production line in the UK with the British constables that never even left the production line because the fuel leaks. That's what tank they're working with, whereas the Jets are out there with a T-34 blowing up, the the opposition forces on the Eastern Front, to get a little bit of history nerdy about it. They are tanking as you should be tanking. That is what tanking is. Are the Browns tanking? I don't think anyone actually knows. So that's why it's kind of difficult to kind of compare the two, because we don't actually, the Browns, we can argue all day about whether they should be tanking, but are they actually actively tanking? I don't know. I don't really know at this point. So obviously, if they are, then they're getting outdone at it. But I just thought it was interesting to talk about because, as I said, you've got 2 teams that are in similar situations. They're both at a crossroads with their franchises, and one of them's took the approach of, fuck it, let's trade away everyone and get as many first-round picks as we can. And the other team has took the approach of, nope, we're going to extend Myles Garrett. We're going to make him the highest-paid player in NFL history, non-quarterback, obviously at the time. We're not going to trade away our assets, even ones that are on expiring deals. And we're going to move forward like that. This game will be the first, I suppose, thing of what kind of, different route works. But we'll learn over the next 10 weeks of the season whether the Browns were better suited to do that or whether they were better suited to obviously follow the Jets, what they've done, and that is trade everyone away and load up on picks. I'm usually a guy that, I will always take the lottery winnings over the lottery. 3 first-round picks for Myles Garrett to try and find Myles Garrett doesn't really make much sense to me. I'd rather just keep Myles Garrett. But obviously, in the certain situations that you are, especially with the Jets, you take those picks all day long. And obviously, if the Browns had the chance to do that, you'd argue the same for them. But interesting to see how both of these teams obviously go, operate going forward. But as I said, the Jets are in full tank mode. I don't think anyone is arguing against that. They have got a legitimate T-34 out there. The Browns, are they tanking? I suppose this game will answer that question for us. But let me know what you guys think about this game. Are you looking forward to the Browns versus the Jets? I know I am. But let me know in the comments, guys, your thoughts on this game, your thoughts on, obviously, the Jets, everything that they've done this last week or so. But As always, thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing weekend. Enjoy this game as much as you can, but most importantly, go Browns.